Hey everybody, it's Friday night. We're going to do a spur of the moment around the world update here. I don't really have a whole lot going on in the fish room per se, but I have been talking about making some changes to my channel, and I'm starting a Patreon page. Probably going to launch that tomorrow. I really got to get on the ball and get some videos shot for that, but hopefully I'll be getting that launched here tomorrow. In the meantime, we don't really have anything going on here in the 29-gallon miscellaneous tank. I will say I'm happy at the way these plants have taken off. I had somebody ask me recently to talk about my plants a little bit and what I do and how I care for them to make them so lush and vibrant in so many of my tanks. And my big secret is I get really easy to care for plants that don't require a lot of maintenance or nutrients or anything else. This Anubias that we're looking at here does well in most kinds of water. I've even got it in brackish water, so if you've got a harder water tank, Anubias works well. Should be sort of rooting into the piece of wood that's kind of holding it in place right now, and as those roots grab a hold of that wood, it will actually steal nutrients from the wood as it breaks down and decays. So that's one way that gets some nutrients. Otherwise, this tank has inert substrate, and all it really gets is fish waste as far as nutrients go. I don't put foods or ferts or tabs or anything in my tanks. They get no CO2 injection. I do have slightly elevated background levels of CO2 down here in my basement. It's been a long time since I've really talked in depth about that. I might go back into that someday. I went around and around and around with it once upon a time, and again, I'm not going to get into that now, but I probably do have a little bit CO2 rich water in my tanks, but not anywhere even approaching what you would have with an injected tank, just slightly higher than normal levels of like my tanks upstairs. So that might help a little bit, but basically it's just the fish waste and very easy to care for plants that don't require a lot of specific light requirements and nutrient requirements and that sort of thing. And that's the big secret to how my tanks look so lush and beautiful and whatnot. So here we are at my gourami tank. I've shot a little bit of video of this tank this week, but it was nothing in particular, just some video of my striped Raphael getting big and fat and not really fitting in the caves. So I am going to have to get in here pretty soon and do a little rearranging. I know I've been talking about that forever, but if you're familiar with me and my channel, I'll talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. One day the mood will strike me and I'll get in there and do it. And before you know it, you will have a video of me getting in here and making some changes. I was hoping that Loach would continue. He saw me coming over here, and now the Loach is waiting for dinner. Everybody's expecting some food right now because it really is time to me. I should be down here feeding these guys and not just pointing the cameras at them. So it was always interesting watching my Loaches sort of groom the other fish and go over them. Maybe we'll get it again right here. Now it's almost like the gourami's asking for it. Well, guess not. Anyway, if you happen to notice all of these little specks moving around here in the tank, and one of my female gouramis dropped a whole bunch of babies again, so I've got maybe, 15 or 20. It's hard to tell. I've never really bothered to count, but just sort of guesstimating. It's not a huge amount of them, but it's quite a few little baby guppies in there swimming around. I do have one of my tanks upstairs that also sprouted guppies again. There's my rubber lip pleco in there going to town. See, they really do a good job of cleaning the leaves without doing any damage to the surface of the leaf at all. I have a lot of people ask me that too, about the rubber lips, if they will get in there and destroy the plants or whatever. And that's a pretty good example of how they will aggressively scour the surface of these plants, because you can imagine as broad faced as these leaves are, directly underneath that light like that, if there was going to be algae growing in this tank, it would certainly be on the surface of those leaves. So they're in great condition, they're algae free, and you just witnessed firsthand that rubber lip in there going to town. So there's your answer. No, they don't damage your plants at all. I always recommend rubber lip plecos for an all-fox grazer or an algae scraping type fish that'll help keep your tank clean. Other than that, nothing really going on in here. Like I said, I didn't really plan on saying all that. No, look, he came over here, and now it's going to work on the Java fern over here. So that's the big secret to how I grow my plants so lush and green. I have very easy to grow plants, and there's a little look at how I keep them all nice and algae free. It's a simple rubber lip pleco. And of course I also have other fish in here. I have this little hillstream loach, which is basically the same type of animal. Goes in there and scrapes and keeps everything nice and clean for me. So we'll be seeing some changes to this tank soon enough. Moving on to my Tbar tank. I don't really have anything. If I can get over here without tripping over everything. I still haven't cleaned up the floor in this room from the last time I was in here complaining that it was a wreck and a disaster. Of course, I've also been dealing with my hurt back, and just coming in here and dealing with my fish has been difficult enough in a lot of cases. So actually getting in here and doing some housework and vacuuming and cleaning and putting stuff away and whatnot, it's not really been on the top of my priority list. Not that stuff like that is ever at the top of my priority list, but it certainly hasn't been as of late with my back injury the way it's been. Anyway, nothing going on in this tank that I can think of. I did lose one of my silver hatchet fish about a week ago. I don't know if that's been included in my last Round the World update. I think we actually saw that in my last Round the World update. Other than that, nothing really going on, so we're going to move on from this tank. Although I will take one brief moment to say, look at the roots growing off of my Anubias here since I've rearranged this tank and moved it. So whether it went through any kind of shock or not initially, it's certainly come around, and you can kind of see down there. It's not quite as easy to make out, but I got a lot of root growth down there too. So again, that Anubias is some really hardy stuff and very easy to grow, along with that Java fern if you're looking for nice, good, durable, hardy, easy to grow stuff. And the Java will grow in brackish water too, and harder water. If you're looking for something with some slightly harder water, you can grow the Java in there too, the Java fern. So this is my Black Ghost Knifefish tank, and very recently I put in, oh, there it is. If you look right on the back of that rock, you see that movement back there. That is a bristlenose pleco, for lack of a better way of saying that, or a nice easy way of saying that. And I put it in this tank because I need some cleanup crew in this tank. You can see this tank is not nice and shiny and clean the way my Gourami tank is. So that bristlenose came out of my tank that was infected with ick. So I'm looking at it as close as I can now. I'm doing my best to keep the camera still here. I'm sorry if I'm not aiming it directly at it. I'm actually trying to see the fish itself. So these fish actually kind of are spotted naturally anyway. So it's hard to tell if those white spots are ick or if it's the white spots of the fish itself. It's not flashing and scraping, and a couple times I've actually got glimpses of it now. That's the best look I've had so far. But the couple glimpses I've had of it so far, it's not showing any signs of flashing or irritation or anything. So I don't know whether that's really infected with ick or not. But it did come out of that quarantine tank that had fish that were infected with ick. That's a whole different story. My pea puffer tank upstairs now has ick in it. My living room tank now has ick in it. And those were the tanks that the neons went in. This bristlenose in there was in that tank with those neons. And again, I didn't bother to look at it. I assumed after all that time, if it was still in there, it was just going to be okay. You know, if it's still alive, it should be fine, right? So I scooped it up, and while it was in the net, I brought the net directly in here and put it right in the tank. I never even put it in a container and checked. So I have to assume it's at least been exposed to ick, and therefore, if nothing else, the net that I was swirling around in the ick-infected tank that I then dunked right into this tank. So this tank is being treated for ick. And so far, I've seen no other fish break out with it, and I don't expect them to. I got on top of the treatment immediately, so the ick wouldn't have time to break out before the treatment went in there, and we should be good from that. But more on that later. My native tank here. Got rid of the Mayan cichlid, as you all know. I did hear from my buddy Everything is going well. He is actually making some minor changes to the tank. He wants to make the tank a little more accommodating for the Mayan cichlid. I know a few people pointed out how sparse and barren the tank was, so I'm not exactly sure what he's doing to it. He didn't give me any details, but he did say he's making some changes, so I will again make sure I put a link down below in the description. And Brian's Pets is the YouTube channel. You want to go check that out. Make sure you subscribe to him, and he will be doing regular updates, I'm sure. Probably not as frequent as I, but he will be doing regular updates on that Mayan cichlid. So if you're still interested in how it's doing and getting along and growing and so on and so forth, make sure you check out his channel and subscribe to it, and you'll get his updates on the health and condition of that. So this tank just has a few more new fish in it. I threw some more minnows. We've got some of these beautiful rosy side dace. I really want to build a school of those up. They're so pretty. I had no idea we had such beautiful fish swimming around in our streams like that. I've never looked at them that close until I saw them in this tank. I put a bunch of crayfish in there this morning, and I've got a couple of these strange looking little fish, and there's still some debate on what they are. The toss up now is between a white suckerfish or a northern hognose, and I'm leaning towards northern hognose, but that's still not, there's still some question about that based on the shape of the fish's head and a few other details. So again, I'm not going to get into that at the moment, but there is some question about what that new fish is that I put in there. And last, I will show you my Chinese algae eater there in the back, still alive and well and doing all right. May not be happy with all these new inhabitants in the tank, but, whatever, is going to have to deal with it. So moving on. My snail tank is doing well now that I took those shrimp out. I had some ghost shrimp in this tank, and I was never ever really able to breed snails, and breeding snails is really easy. All you got to do is overfeed a tank, and you'll get snails breeding like mad. So I think what was happening was all the eggs were being eaten by the shrimp, and while they were laying eggs everywhere, none of them were ever hatching. So now that I got the shrimp out of there, I actually have, and if you saw that little thing drift by, this is actually a filtered tank, and there is water circulation and everything in there, and that's a little bit of floating vegetation that just went by. So now I'm getting good growth again. I've broken up some eggshell in there, so there's some calcium in the water, and even the Java moss that had attached to that rock is starting to grow back and look pretty good. So hopefully it'll be a nice, pretty looking tank here in the near future. My gudgeon tank. I don't want to talk too much about this because there's going to be some changes happening down here to the fish room, and this tank may or may not be part of the changes. I don't want to give away too much because I'm still not 100% sure myself, but I do think I might do something different with this tank. I don't know if that means the gudgeon is going to go or not yet. I think it's probably going to stay. I will say that. I'm doing what I can. I really hope I can work out a way to keep this fish. I probably wouldn't buy another one if I ever lost this one or it dies of old age someday or whatever. But since I've got it, I love it, and he's really cool. I really still need to shoot that video that I've promised everybody of him actually jumping out of the water and taking food right out of my hand, because he will do that. He will, if I dangle a piece of freeze-dried krill or something slightly over the water, an inch or two above the water, it will actually breach, and it's actually breached and grabbed the tip of my finger before. That's how I found out it would do that. It actually scared the hell out of me. Didn't bite, no teeth or anything that I could tell. But just having a fish come up out of the water and latch onto the tip of your finger is a bizarre experience, especially when it's totally unexpected. So stay tuned for that. Again, we're going to move on. I don't want to talk too much about this tank. I'll probably wind up saying something I regret, and we're already a good ways into this video anyway. So here we've got my 125-gallon African-themed tank. And I do say African-themed. I know you don't have to point out that all the fish and everything in here are not African. Everybody's doing well in here. Haven't had any issues. I haven't had any problems. I really haven't done any water changes or any maintenance on this tank in a little while, so I do need to get in there and get some work done. I have been seeing my various Ancistrus and Hypancistrus being much more bold and outgoing. This is a female bristlenose. That's why we don't see any bristles, is because it's a female. And she's getting pretty thick and broad across the back of the head and getting kind of beefy. So she's about 4 years old now, and I never realized they got quite so thick and chunky. And at 4, for that type of catfish, Aluria caridae, that's still pretty young. So, we might be looking at a nice big hefty hardy fish there one day. I've also got some good video recently of my chocolate zebra plecos down here. It looked very much like spawning or maybe pre-spawning behavior. I do know the guy that sold them to me. When he spawned them, the one thing he did tell me is they are closed cave spawners. They won't spawn in like tubes or just underneath rocks or something. It has to be a closed-in cave. And I believe the male sort of traps the female in the cave and doesn't let her come out until she's laid eggs. And then he actually chases her out, and then he guards the eggs. So it should be interesting to watch if I can pull that off. I'm not really doing anything specifically to make it happen. I never have really been interested in breeding fish before. But if it happens, that will be really cool. And if I get some babies from it or something, these aren't cheap fish. So if I was to get a bunch of babies, that might be, a couple dollars credit down at the fish store or something. We'll just have to wait and see how that all plays out. But that might be something exciting here happening in the really near future too. So look forward to that. Other than that, not a lot going on in this tank. And I will say finally, I still have not gotten in here and sort of repositioned that Java. I kind of want to tuck it back up here so it sort of hides that blunt end of that piece of wood. I really hate the way that piece of wood just stops so abruptly like that. It looks very unnatural. So moving on, my brackish tank. I had to think about it for a minute. I forgot what tank it was. Butterbean's up here in the right hand corner. This is where he sits to try to get my attention. Again, it's feeding time. Everybody's hungry. I'm really surprised he's not splashing vigorously. He probably sees the camera, so he's not sure whether to come over to try to get food or whether to run away because the camera's out. But nothing really going on in this tank either. I'm still also in the process of trying to work out a way to get Butterbean into a better home, a bigger home, without having to get rid of that gudgeon. This is all part of what I'm trying to do here in the fish room right now. Again, I'm not 100% how it's going to work out, but I am working on it, so stay tuned for that. Pretty soon we should be able to see Butterbean in some sort of better and bigger tank than this, because it's getting really, really cramped up and small having him in this little 20-gallon tank. So that's all I'm really going to say about this tank too. I'm going to move on. I will say there's another little peek at my quarantine tank down there. We're not going to get into a discussion about that because I still got some fish in there that are going to be revealed when they're ready to come out of quarantine, and that's going to be exciting because I got some really cool fish. I will say that one of the fish in there was $30, so it was a good one. And that's going to be for later. So again, make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, and then that way you won't miss any of the stuff I've got coming up that I've been talking about. This tank is my red claw crab tank. Not a lot going on in here. I did have a crab die recently. I know when I first set this tank up, I thought I lost a bunch of crabs, but it was really just the crabs sloughing their exoskeletons, or their shells, whatever you want to call them. And I didn't realize what was going on. The shells were so complete and solid. They really seemed like sort of dead crabs. And it didn't take me long to figure out that it was not the case. Excuse me. This crab, however, was definitely a dead crab. We saw it roll over onto its back. I watched it crawl around the tank feebly for 2 or 3 days. And eventually it just finally stopped moving, and I got rid of it because it was most clearly dead at some point. I do definitely still have 2 of my shrimp in here. I don't know how well they're coming out on camera. I'm getting too much glare from the overhead. There we go. There's one on the right hand side of this rock. There's one on the left hand side of this rock. Those are both ghost shrimp. There should be a third one in here somewhere, but I don't see it at the moment. And I also don't really see any crabs out. There's one that's kind of hanging off the back of this rock right here. This end of the tank is really dirty. It's really hard to see in there, so we're not even going to bother, I guess. But I did shoot some video of this tank not too long ago, and we got some good video of the crabs crawling around. So if you're interested, then you can always go and look at my red-clawed crab tank playlist and see lots of videos of this tank all the way back from the day I put it together up until recently. There's one. We can have a little look at this crab before the video's over. You can see one back in the caves back there, sort of making its way out. They're foraging for food. Really, really fascinating little animals. I love this tank. So that brings us all the way back where we started, and that completes our trip around the world, so to speak. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss any of the stuff I've got coming up. Don't forget, I'm starting a Patreon channel that will be published tomorrow. Tomorrow being Saturday the 7th. Don't know when you're watching this video, but Saturday the 7th will be the big launch of my Patreon page. So if you're interested in subscribing or signing up for that, I will also be putting links below all my future videos once I've got the page established. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.